Man, this corny ass shit right here. So the ending is basically Final Fantasy 13. It's like they took Final Fantasy 13 and Final Fantasy 4 and just slapped them together. That's basically what this story devolves into. That's what it regresses into. I say the word regress because the story kind of started off okay, and then it just turned into some bullshit pretty quickly. You finished the game. The game will now save your clear data. Loading this file will unlock a new quest where brand new adventures and encounters await. Uh-huh. You know, the ending to this fucking game doesn't even make any sense, really, because if you think about it, so they freed Dana, right, from the so-called Great Spirit thing. Now they have another fucking issue that the final cutscene doesn't even try to address, that the characters even spoke about in the last third of the game quite a bit, is that the Danans still hate the Renans, right, for being enslaved for 300 years. So it looks like, you know, the game developers, they left it on a happy note with the final cutscene, but nothing about that has actually been addressed. So it's not even really a good ending if you think about it. It really isn't. Because now they have a bigger problem. Yeah. 9 out of 10, my ass. 8 out of 10, my ass. 7 out of 10, my ass. What the hell is that in the background? They got married? What? This stupid shit. Tales of Arise was developed and published by Bandai Namco. And before I say anything else in this video, I want to mention that the way I view video games and the way I play video games now is completely different from how I used to play video games, and it's completely different from how most people play video games and how most people view video games. Video games are seen as, you know, toys, basically. They're seen as products that's made for an adolescent audience by the majority of people that are out there. In case anyone has, you know, ran into this issue discussing video games outside the internet. Because video games are viewed so casually, obviously that means the majority of gamers are casuals, which is fine. The industry would not exist without a casual audience being the majority. It just would not, it wouldn't work. So when I look up a list of the top 10 best-selling games from X year, you know, for X amount of time, I don't really care if Call of Duty makes #1. I honestly don't. I don't give a shit. I don't care if Fortnite is up on that list. I don't care if a game like Overwatch is on that list. You know, I don't care if a game like Apex Legends is on that list. I don't care if a game like Grand Theft Auto 5 is on that list. I just don't care. What gets me is we have the casual gamers and we have the hardcore gamers, right? The hardcore gamers, the secret about hardcore gamers is that the majority of hardcore gamers are just as casual as the casual gamers. Because the major difference with hardcore gamers is that they view everything through rose-tinted glasses. Nostalgia. And nostalgia can be a very dangerous thing because it can be weaponized to be used against a certain target audience to trick that target audience into thinking a product is actually better than what it actually is. And that's the problem with a lot of different video games in specific genres these days. One specific genre where this is definitely an issue is RPGs of any kind. I don't care if it's a Western RPG. I don't care if it's a Japanese RPG. They all have the same issue that I'm talking about. It's very easy for video game developers to make something that appears to be of high quality, but if you really look closely, if you are able to actually constructively pick apart a game for what it is from all angles, dialogue, character interactions, important story beats, different things like that. If you're able to actually constructively pick apart these things, you may see through the bullshit. So when it comes to Tales of Arise, this game had a very fucking stupid premise from the get-go. So this whole game's thing is, it wants to be this, at least early on, the game wants to be this in-depth commentary about slavery. Yet, if you actually take a brief look at the characters that they have in this game, you'll notice something that I noticed immediately. So here we have this Japanese game. This was made by Japanese people about very important subject matter. Yet, if you take a look at this game's characters, you'll notice something. I noticed how nearly every single fucking character in this game is not a person of color. Every single character in this game, literally, except for one, is white. But you want to make a game that's commenting on slavery. Now, I'm sure because the target audience for this mess is obviously white people, right? Caucasian people, and Asians as well. It's very clear that this game was not targeted towards a black audience. To anyone who is Caucasian or Hispanic or Asian, they're going to look at this game very differently. In fact, they're going to look at the theme. One of the heavy themes that this game tries to throw around, the whole concept of subjugation of a particular race of people by another race of people. Another word for that would be colonialism. They're going to look at something like that, and their first thought is going to be, well, I like this theme. I like the way they're doing this. I like the fact that they're tackling this important subject matter. We don't have too many games that are doing that. Blah, 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 the usual shit. But me, as a black male, I look at this, and my first thought is, well, you want to make a game that's talking about slavery, right? Then why in the fuck is there only one colored character in this game? Dohalim is the only fucking colored character in this game. Why is that? And Dohalim, he's not even black. He's not black either. So this game was already pissing me off from the start, from the get-go, from the jump. It was already pissing me off. Its themes about slavery and subjugation and colonialism and all that, to me, it's not genuine. To me, it's a bunch of bullshit. And this is on top of the game being animated. But of course, this is just the beginning of what my experience was with Tales of Arise. Now, I didn't hate this game. I really didn't. I really wanted to like this game. The reason I had chose to buy this game in the first place is because I played the demo and I saw it had a good presentation and it had all the right ingredients to be great. There was a great game in there somewhere. That's why I decided to buy the game on Steam, albeit at a priceable discount. But that's why I had decided to invest in the game initially. And, I do want to talk about what some of the pros are with Tales of Arise. The art direction is finely tuned without overstepping the boundaries of realism versus animation. I've seen some of the gameplay for the older Tales games, including, the art style from the older games in the series, because this is my first Tales game. So there are certain things that I was not aware of that are actually, series staples that I'm now aware of after doing some, proper research. And the art direction, as far as it goes, and the presentation in general, this is the best game in the series as far as that goes. They've really pushed it to where, if they push it any further, it could be on level with, Final Fantasy. It really could if they pushed it far enough. And they're just about there. The characters are well animated. The way the art style has been presented, you can take the characters seriously. without feeling like an otaku nut, someone who's just obsessed with everything anime. You can actually take the game seriously enough to where you don't have to feel like you're just a hardcore anime fan. And this is all thanks to the splendid art direction. For two, the basics of the combat system is well integrated for non-boss encounters. They did a great job of making the combat system accessible to those who've played this series before, but also for those who haven't played a Tales of game before. It was pretty approachable, although, there are certain things that I think they could have simplified further, such as, the way they mapped the controls to the controller. I think that could have been simplified a great deal. But the game is simple enough to where, you can understand it. I was able to understand it, and I was able to engage with the game without too much frustration, in terms of like the controls and just how to play it in general. For three, the story, while not unique or original, is at the bare minimum decent, at least at the very beginning, with lore that's simple enough to understand. So as they were explaining what certain things were in this story, what certain things were, meant to represent, the definitions of certain things like the Danins, the Renins, the Master Cores, astral energy, as they were explaining what all of those things were, I didn't feel like they were beating me over the head with it. They would explain, this is what this is, and then they would just, add to it over time instead of beating me over the head with the same concept over and over again, which is a problem that anime properties typically have in the first place, is too much exposition. I didn't feel like there was too much exposition with Tales of Arise throughout the length of its story. And another thing is that the characters Dohalim and Kisara are excellent.
Tell me it isn't true, Lord Dohalim. Because my brother believed in you in your dream!
Forgive me.
So this is who you really are?
Stop!
Let go! Let me go! Let me go!
It's enough, Kisara!
Let go!
Stop!
I'll tear him apart! I swear I'll...
Are you trying to ignore your brother's dying wish? He entrusted you with his dream! Just kill me. I'm nothing. I am but a shell of a man now. I'm just a pitiful coward who shrank from his duties. I would only ask that you make it quick.
Each of those characters are well written enough that they should have served as the two main characters, honestly, instead of Alphen and Shion. Those characters would have made for far better leads than, the game's actual two leading characters. And also, the skill tree is one of the best that I've seen in any RPG, as it features a wide range of useful abilities that greatly expands the party's capabilities in battle. The only downside is that the high cost of each node really makes it an endless grind, and one that's not really fun. Now, as I call out some of these pros, it's at this point in the video where I have now run out of good things to say about this game, and now I'm just going to be talking about cons for the remainder of the duration. Now I'm going to talk about why this game pissed me off, why this is one of the most overrated releases this year. Because there were a lot of piss poor design choices that went into this game, and what got me is that some of those choices were deliberate. They were intentional. And I'm going to cover all of that. But just to start off, something that really bothered me with this game are the boss fights. The boss fights are dreadfully awful as they incorporate damage sponge enemies and work against numerous essential mechanics, including the magic and evade systems. Now, when I first started playing this game, I was playing on hard difficulty, and I just kept running into this issue where I would have to lower the difficulty, scale the difficulty down, because every time I would run into a boss, the boss would be so overpowered that I would have to burn through my consumables list, all of my healing items would just be depleted within a matter of minutes. So I would have to scale the difficulty down numerous times, and that's because the bosses are just horribly balanced. There is no proper balance when it comes to the boss fights, or even some of the late game enemy encounters. At first I was wondering, why are these things so horribly balanced? What was the development team trying to accomplish with these piss poor boss fights? And then it became immediately clear to me that there is a reason why the development team developed certain things the way they did in this game, which I'll get to. But another thing that bothered me are the skits, which are completely random and a boring way to tell a story in a video game, especially in epic RPGs such as this. The skits are completely random. They just happen at a moment's notice. Sometimes they'll happen after you enter a certain area or after certain story beats. They'll just pop up on screen on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, and you can trigger them if you want. They're completely optional, but if you choose to just skip them, then you're really missing out on a lot of important character interactions and dialogue between the party members. And they could have easily had just put the dialogue in game like a normal video game instead of doing these stupid ass skits. And I noticed there was another game that did something similar, albeit worse than what's in Tales of Arise this year, which is Scarlet Nexus. That game also did the same thing. Although the skits were worse in that game, I still am not a fan of the whole skit thing. Either have the dialogue be in game or just make a goddamn cutscene and be done with it. It also didn't help the fact that after a while, because there's over 300 different skits in this game, I didn't even see all the skits that are available, but there's over 300 that's in the game. I started to notice after a while just how bad the lip syncing actually is, because this is a Japanese game. You could tell the characters were animated to speak one particular language, which is obviously Japanese. But when you listen to the English dub version, because I played this game entirely in English, you'll notice that certain movements with the characters' mouths when they're speaking clearly is not English. Very clearly. Even though it's an animated game, you can easily tell when a character is speaking English and when they're not, when their mouth keeps moving after they finish the sentence, or when certain words and certain phrases don't exactly match up with their mouth movements. It's just one of those things that, it feels like I'm nitpicking, but, after a while, it just gets to be ridiculous. Once again, they should have either made a cutscene, or if they didn't have the money for that, if they didn't want to budget putting in more cutscenes in the game, then they should have just put dialogue in game instead of having these ridiculous, they're not even in-game cutscenes. They're just, I don't know, they're just weird. Very strange with the skits. I was not a fan of the skits at all. Aside from that, the side quests aren't essential to developing the story or characters, which makes them a padded waste of time. I didn't really care for any of the side quests in this game. Most of them are fetch quests. They're glorified fetch quests where you'll run into an NPC character, and then the NPC character will ask you to go and retrieve something for them, or to go and kill a monster and then come back and tell them that you've killed the monster, and then they'll give you a sum of money as a reward. That's so cliche at this point that it's like I don't even feel like doing side quests anymore in games like this, because it's a complete waste of time. And unfortunately, there's no better way to earn a decent sum of money in this game outside of playing the side quests. But with that said, I still skipped pretty much, I would say, 90% of the side quests in this game. I just didn't care. And then some of the ones that I did complete, I didn't get anything from them. They didn't add to the characters. They didn't add to the world. They didn't add to anything. They were just a complete waste of time that was meant to pad out the length. Easing my way a little bit into the combat system, the CPU can use abilities in combat that aren't currently equipped to the corresponding character, yet the player is unable to do the same. So with the combat in this game, you have abilities that you can equip to the characters to use in combat, basically through a shortcut menu. And you can equip up to 6 different abilities on the ground and then 6 different abilities in the air for each of the 6 playable characters in this game. Something that bothered me is that Why is the CPU able to use abilities that I haven't equipped to that character yet? When I switch to that character myself and I'm playing as that character, what I can do with this character is limited to this shortcut menu. I much prefer it how they have it developed in the Final Fantasy games. Like in the Final Fantasy games, whatever abilities that you've unlocked for a particular character, you can just select from this long list. They don't force you into a shortcut menu where you have to pick and choose different abilities that you've already unlocked. And clearly, I get it. They didn't want this game to be a menu-based game. So it's not something like, any of the Final Fantasy games or anything like that. However, there are other ways that the development team could have incorporated a long ability list in the combat system without limiting what the player can actually do as far as their options go, without having to pull up a menu and switch out different abilities in combat, which is something that I had to do pretty often, especially when I had characters that became incapacitated. Something else that was cliche and completely boring is the fishing minigame. It seems like every RPG now needs to have some kind of fishing minigame. I don't really understand why game developers keep doing this, because these things aren't really fun. And out of the fishing mini games that I've seen in RPGs, Final Fantasy 15's was probably the best one that I've seen. The worst is probably Nier Automata's, and the one here in Tales of Arise is probably somewhere in the middle, somewhere between those two. Either way, it's still fucking boring. It's stupid. It's really a waste of time. The same goes with the camping feature, which they clearly stole from Final Fantasy 15, where you can cook various dishes and they'll give you buffs or whatever and heal your party. The camping thing with Final Fantasy 15 wasn't perfect either, but the whole point was to emphasize this road trip vibe. In this game, it just seems completely random and not really relevant to anything that's actually going on in the story. Again, I'm not really sure why it's there, and they could have found a better way, once again, to apply buffs to the party. And another thing that bothers me with the camping feature is that the party is able to camp and sleep in moments where doing so narratively doesn't even make any damn sense. So you'll have like moments in the game where something important is going on within, the story itself, like within a specific area that the team immediately has to go and address, yet the game gives you the option to go and sleep at a hotel.
Clear. We're coming with you.
I appreciate the thought, really, but there's no need for you all to get involved in this.
Dohalim said it himself, right? All of us, we're liberators.
All done.
Oh, it's like, oh, we got to go take care of this important thing that's going on. But instead, I'm going to go take a nap. I'm going to go to sleep for a few hours. So I'll just worry about what's going on afterwards. It was completely fucking silly. Something else that didn't work in this game. And this, again, feels like a nitpick, but this just bothered the hell out of me. And this is part of the reason why I say I don't blame non-anime fans for hating anime because of things like this. The Hootle character. Hootle is the little white baby owl that basically follows Ringwell around throughout the entire game. I really hate characters like this. This fucking character is stupid and only serves to function as a furry distraction, but provides no purpose to the larger story. Hootle in this game is essentially the Porgs from the Star Wars sequel trilogy. You remember the Porgs from Star Wars The Last Jedi? That's basically what this thing is in this game. This thing has absolutely no purpose and doesn't contribute to anything that goes on in the story at any given point. And then they even have a small quest where you have to go around and hunt down owls or whatever. And the owls are just completely childish. And this goes back to the whole thing of, I can't take the game seriously, with its important themes about, slavery and subjugation and colonialism. I can't take those things seriously when you have furries running around in this game that provide absolutely no purpose to any of those themes. A better example of, an animal character or whatever from a game like this is Morgana from Persona 5. That's a far better example of how to write an animal into a fictional fantasy story. And the reason Morgana worked is because Morgana actually was a character. Morgana was a huge part of what was going on in the story for Persona 5. By comparison, Hootle has no purpose for being here. It's just another cute furry creature that is meant to draw in a specific target demographic, which I assume is women and young adolescent females. You could remove the Hootle character in this game, as well as the rest of the owls and that whole side quest, and nothing about the story would change. Literally, nothing would be altered, nothing would be drastically different. That within of itself is the sign of a bad character. A bigger problem than that, though, is that 4 out of the 6 main casts aren't particularly interesting. Rinwell, for example, a fucking stupid name, by the way. Rinwell wants revenge on one of the boss characters because they murdered her family. Yet we don't see this in the story at any point. Law, being another example, is upset because he claims his father abandoned him and his mother to fight for a rebel resistance terrorist group, yet we don't see any of this either. We're just told these things throughout the game. And because we're just told these things, the impact isn't really there. This game has the same issue that I had with Final Fantasy XIII, where we're told certain things about the characters, about the main cast, but as the audience, we don't really get to see or live through any of these experiences ourselves. So it's kind of hard to care about what's actually going on with some of these characters when you haven't actually seen it yourself. Another example is Shion, who is the lead female character for this game. She's on the cover art. Shion is another character whose backstory is essential to her actions and her whole motivations throughout the game, but none of her backstory is explored visually. We don't see any of her childhood. We're just told certain things and whatnot, but we don't actually see a glimpse at what it was like for her to grow up. We don't actually visually see these things, so again, it's kind of hard to sympathize with a character like this. And then there's the main character, Alphen. Alphen's backstory is showcased. He's one of the very few characters in the game where we do get to see a glimpse of his history. The ironic part, though, is that it's too bad that despite that the game does explore Alphen's backstory, it doesn't really make his character interesting. The reason for this is because of the way Alphen is written. He's written to be overly optimistic for basically no reason, and he's a character that's written to be pretty much always in a good mood past a certain point in the story, which makes his character completely unrealistic, especially given the fact that he's technically a slave. The only time where Alphen shows any true emotion really comes from the beginning of the game, like the very beginning, when he has the mask over his face. Once the mask is broken, his development as a character basically stops at that point. This is why I say Dol Halim, who is the best character in the game, should have been the main character. Dol Halim has the best dialogue in Tales of Arise. He has the most interesting backstory, which we also get to see a little bit of Dol Halim's backstory as well. And he's clearly the smartest character in the game out of the 6 playable characters. And under Dol Halim, Kisara would have served great as a secondary leading character, but of course not. Doing something like that would have actually made the story, I don't know, kind of good. And clearly that wasn't on the agenda for Bandai Namco. An even larger problem with the story to this game, the reason why I just called bullshit past a certain point, is because past a certain point in the narrative, the game completely abandons its core theme of slavery and subjugation by introducing something stupid and unnecessary at the last minute during the last few hours of this ridiculous plot. As it turns out, the Renans aren't actually their own race. The truth about the Renans is that they're really Danans who were kidnapped from a race of robot people who answered to a god in the form of a ball of light in outer space.
Well, in a nutshell, the Renans were originally created from Danans by the Helganquil.
But if that's true, then that would mean there aren't any people on Rena.
Aside from the Final Fantasy VII Remake, I haven't recalled a time where a video game tried to pull some last-minute bullshit that completely ruins what has been set up throughout its runtime. Although other examples would be like Assassin's Creed 3, Mass Effect 3, games like that. But yeah, it was at this point in the game where I was like, okay, you guys are full of shit and this story sucks. So going back to the critique of the boss fights being improperly balanced with this game, the reason certain things have been developed poorly in this game is because Bandai Namco did this intentionally. And the reason they did it intentionally is to introduce microtransactions into this game to try and entice fans in order to go and spend real money on what's essentially experience boosters, as well as currency boosters. Alright, so I'm on Steam right now. And as you can see, I have pulled up the results, the search results for Tales of Arise. And this is all of the DLC packs and whatnot, and the microtransactions as well that go with the game. So if you want, you can, for $3 here, you can buy experience boosters. This particular one gives you plus 10 levels, level up 1, level up 2, and they have a few more. And then you can also buy gold. Gold is basically your in-game currency, your money. It's the equivalent of the guild system in the Final Fantasy series. And so you can buy 100,000 gold for $2. You can stack them if you want. This is pretty hilarious to me. Then they also have the different boost packs for your growth. They got a relief support one. They got some cosmetic DLC here. So this is why the game is so improperly balanced, is because Bandai Namco just has to make some extra cash. They couldn't help themselves. They had to infest this game with a bunch of shady anti-consumer DLC and microtransaction support. So, this actually bleeds over into the main game itself, and it's a huge problem considering this is a single-player game, and single-player games should not have practices like this in any modern video game. The experience boosters and the currency boosters, if you read the descriptions of them, clearly make the game easier. And even though they're only a few dollars each, the whole point of microtransactions in the video game industry is that if you buy one, you're likely to buy another one, and then another one, and then another one, and then it starts to add up. That's how they get you. And throughout my entire playthrough, I had refused to purchase any microtransactions of any kind, as well as the cosmetic DLC that's available for this game. And there's some very expensive cosmetic DLC for Tales of Arise. If the story couldn't get any worse than what it already turned out to be, which was already a waste of time by the 12th fucking hour, it does, ironically, get worse. The ending to this game is a complete fucking joke. The real problem, as I mentioned right at the start of the video, is that the hatred between the Danans and the Renans, it has not been rectified, and it hasn't been addressed by the end of the game. And this is something that the characters, talk about consistently, especially in the game's third act. Yet the final cutscene does nothing to actually, say, how they intend to resolve this issue. It's just assumed that through time, the Danans and the Renans will eventually get along. But, of course, that's not realistic. But something else that bothered me even more that I didn't mention at the start of the video is the whole relationship theme, this romance subplot between Shion and Alphen. First of all, their romance, just judging off of the writing itself, their interaction, their dialogue, it does make sense, like how they eventually fall in love or whatever. What doesn't make sense, and what really disgusted me and made me fucking sick to my stomach, is that if you really think about the relationship between Alphen and Shion, it quickly becomes a case of pedophilia. Because as it turns out, the developers for this game released some important information about the main cast before this game came out. And they revealed that Shion is apparently a 19-year-old girl. She's a 19-year-old woman. So I'm on the wiki page for the Shion character. And scroll down right here. Apparently, her age is indeed listed right here, and the character apparently is 19 years old. I don't think she's actually 19 years old. I think this is just some bullshit that the Japanese came up with because, the Japanese, they just can't help themselves to write women who are above the age of 20. So this seems to be a cultural issue, and this is far from the first time that this has happened. To me, she appears to be in her 20s, but, even if she was in her 20s, or even if she was in her 30s, hell, even if she was in her 40s, there's an even bigger issue with the Shion-Alphen romance subplot. And Alphen is a 300-plus-year-old man. Alphen is actually 300 years old because he was put in stasis 300 years prior before the game's main events. So when you think about it, the relationship between Alphen and Shion should not be a thing. If they had just left it to where they're just friends and Alphen saw Shion as like a daughter or something like that, then it would have made sense. And, I wouldn't have a complaint. But they actually tried to go there and say that a 300-plus-year-old man married a 19-year-old chick, and somehow that's just acceptable. This is the equivalent of Gandalf marrying a teenage girl in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, except J.R.R. Tolkien had some fucking common sense not to write some dumb shit like that. The motherfuckers who wrote this game clearly didn't have the same level of common sense, or any common sense at all for that matter.
Tries my motherfucking patience.
Last but not least, New Game Plus. New Game Plus is extremely important for a game like this because obviously you want to have a certain level of replayability for a game like this. Unfortunately, New Game Plus in the Tales series, after I've done some considerable research on the franchise itself, New Game Plus has never been handled properly in the Tales series. New Game Plus in this game specifically is horrible. It's literally the worst New Game Plus I've ever seen, as the only way your progress carries over to a new game is if you hunt down items known as artifacts. If you miss certain artifacts, you can lose your current level, your ability unlocks, your item stock, your costumes, your consumables even. The list goes on and on. It's a completionist nightmare. So if you're someone who likes hunting down achievements and trophies for video games or whatever, this is definitely going to be one of the worst games to try and do that if you don't know certain things ahead of time. And ironically, apparently some of the DLC packs for this game include some of those same artifacts that you're supposed to hunt down in order to successfully carry over your progress to a new game. And that does not surprise me whatsoever. Bandai Namco has a history of shady DLC practices. And this is far from the first game where they've been called out on their bullshit when it comes to DLC and microtransactions. So, all in all, taking in, the cons and the pros and whatnot, the cons for this game greatly outstretch the pros list. And it's a real shame because, like I said earlier in the video, I really wanted to like this game, but I just didn't. And I really don't have any plans to play this game any further or to replay it at some point in the future. I don't see the point in doing that. I've already said my piece on it, and it's really not that great. In fact, I wouldn't say it's good at all. Aside from the presentation and some of the the music selection, which doesn't always match the fucking scene of what's actually happening in the game, ironically, and the art direction and whatnot, and some improvements to the combat system. Aside from these things, this is just another typical run-of-the-mill JRPG with a bad story, terrible characters, a horrible approach to progression, too much of an emphasis on DLC and microtransactions, boring side quests, boring mini games. It's just a waste of time. I actually ran into a poll someone made that asked the question, which do you prefer, the Final Fantasy VII Remake or Tales of Arise? The Final Fantasy VII Remake was bullshit too, but if I had to choose, one game to replay out of the two, I would replay Final Fantasy VII Remake in a heartbeat over this. This is easily one of the most overrated games that's come out this year, and aside from its small niche audience, no one's going to remember this fucking game in 2 months. In fact, it's pretty much already been forgotten. I suppose the only thing that really arose from this whole thing is my impatience for stupidity, which this game was an expert at grating on my fucking last nerve. I will be very skeptical to play another Tales game in the future as a result.
Sword, the power shield has bestowed upon me. I'll take you down!